Hello and welcome to Freemasons, The Inside Story. I'm Wes Turnbull. In this series we'll continue to take a closer look behind the scenes of Freemasonry in Victoria. This year the United Grand Lodge of Victoria is celebrating its 125-year anniversary. But Freemasonry in Victoria is much older than that. In this episode we'll take a look at some of the history and origins of Freemasonry. The question of where Freemasonry originated is to this day a subject of speculation. Some believe that the story begins in a sacred temple built 950 years before Common Era.
The building of King Solomon's Temple is a story used by Freemasons to teach lessons in moral truth and virtue, and form the basis of much of the symbolism and ritual of Freemasonry today. It parallels, if you like, the building of a man's character to match the reported beauty of King Solomon's Temple.
The general consensus amongst Masonic scholars is that Freemasonry in its current form evolved out of stonemason craft guilds. These craftsmen learnt the skills of building and architecture and were responsible for building the magnificent cathedrals of Europe in the late Middle Ages. These men carried out skilled, delicate and precise work, carving out raw stone. The building of these grand and complicated structures required many skilled craftsmen and took many years to complete. The masons employed would live on site in lodges. They'd work under the direction of a master who would direct the work according to the plans for the intended structure.
The craft guilds of the period might be considered to be the forerunners of modern workplace unions, managing the interest of their members. They had strict membership qualifications and competency tests. These craftsmen were divided into groups of apprentices, fellows of the craft and masters.
A young man on taking up a trade would join the lodge and be sworn to secrecy to protect the skills of the trade. This is believed to be the origin of the passwords and modes of recognition still practiced by Freemasons of today in a symbolism of truth and fidelity.
When we offer a handshake, we are showing some openness to someone else. In the Middle Ages, the stonemasons used handshakes to show who they were. In those days, they didn't have certificates or diplomas, and a handshake was one way they were able to show the membership of the group. Today, as Freemasons, we use handshakes in a similar way to be able to distinguish a Freemason. But we also use handshakes as a measure of trust. The fact that we can confide something to a brother and he can hold that secret indicates a man of character and integrity.
Young men who wished to become stonemasons were apprenticed to an experienced craftsman. During their apprenticeship, they'd be taught to use the tools of a stonemason to carve out and shape stones fit for the building of stone structures. Apprenticed at a young age, they looked to their masters for guidance in life lessons. We as Freemasons use the tools, clothing and implements of the stonemasons not to build physical structures, but rather for moral lessons and intellectual truths.
We will focus on three tools: the square, the level and the compasses. With a square, a builder ensures the correct angles of buildings is maintained during construction. To Freemasons, it is about ordering your life according to morals. In buildings, a level is to ensure that correct levels are maintained during the construction phase. In Freemasonry, the level reminds us that we are all equal. With a set of compasses, you can prescribe a circle. In Freemasonry, This circle defines the limitations of our own ability, the limitations prescribed by law, and the limitations prescribed by the moral law.
The transition of stonemasons' lodges to lodges of Freemasons is obscured in history. Many men who were seeking moral guidance joined lodges not to learn the skills of a stonemason, but to learn the principles of moral truths. These men were known as speculative masons and distinct from operative stonemasons. During the mid-1600s and the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, many learned men became Freemasons, as it gave them the opportunity to meet in a safe place to discuss issues of the day with like-minded men. Men such as Sir Isaac Newton, Mozart, and Voltaire were Freemasons who have made significant contributions to society. By the end of the 17th century, Freemasons' lodges consisted largely of speculative masons. In 1717, 4 independent lodges meeting in London came together to form a Grand Lodge to rule and govern the craft. At their meeting, they elected one of those present, Anthony Sayer, to be the first Grand Master. This became known as the Grand Lodge of England and met quarterly for the government of the craft. The Grand Lodge issued an official book of constitutions and expanded Freemasonry to the more distant parts of the country. In the mid-1700s, a rival Grand Lodge was formed in England by Freemasons who disagreed with some of the ideas and innovations of the first Grand Lodge. Throughout the remainder of the 1800s, these two groups were rivals to each other. Agreement was finally reached between them in the early 19th century, with the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England in 1813. In the years following, the Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed in 1725 and the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736. The spread of British Freemasonry was greatly facilitated by the granting of warrants to form lodges by members of the army. These lodges met wherever the soldiers were stationed. This enabled the spread of Freemasonry to parts of North America between 1730 and 1783, to India from 1729, to Canada from 1750, and across Europe. The beginning of Freemasonry in Australia is perhaps as clouded in mystery as its worldwide beginnings. It's believed that the first Freemason to step foot on Australian soil was in 1770. The English navigator Captain James Cook explored the fertile east coast of Australia, which he named New South Wales. On board the Endeavour was Freemason and botanist Joseph Banks, credited for introducing the Western world to eucalyptus. So impressed by the volume of flora and fauna hitherto unknown to European science, the inlet was named Botany Bay. Freemasonry had tentative beginnings in Australia. From the arrival of the First Fleet in 1788, the authorities of the penal colony were very suspicious of unauthorised private meetings and refused requests to form a lodge of Sydney during the first decade of the 1800s. In 1802, there were reports of Masonic meetings being held on board the HMS Buffalo at anchor in Sydney Harbour.
On May 14th, 1803, a Masonic meeting was held in Sydney attended by sailors, settlers and Irish convict Sir Henry Brown Hayes. All attending were arrested when the meeting was interrupted by military personnel. In response to the meeting, Sydney Governor Philip Gidley King banned Masonic meetings without his permission.
The British government appointed Major General Lachlan Macquarie to govern New South Wales in 1810. Macquarie encouraged the development of the colony to to such an extent that he became known as the Father of Australia. A Freemason himself, he was noted for his tolerance and often criticised for his policy of rehabilitating emancipated convicts. Brethren who were Freemasons from the English, Irish and Scottish constitutions arrived in Australia and sought to practice Freemasonry with warrants issued from their respective Grand Lodges. The first civilian lodge, the Australian Social Lodge, number 2601C, was formed in 1820 after obtaining a warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Over the next 2 decades, Freemasonry grew and developed in Sydney, with additional lodges as well as the establishment of a fund of benevolence. The settlement of Tasmania closely followed the establishment of Sydney. The settlers' first introduction to Freemasonry was through the many travelling military lodges, with the first civilian lodge established in the town of Hobart. In the 1830s, free settlements were formed in Melbourne and Adelaide. The tale of Freemasonry in South Australia starts before those involved even stepped foot on Australian soil.
In 1834, a group of men from England destined for the new settlements of South Australia were granted a warrant prior to departing England, which enabled them to practice their Freemasonry and initiate new local members upon arriving. This new lodge, Lodge of Friendship number 613, met twice in London before setting sail for Australia.
Freemasonry expanded to Western Australia in 1842, when less than 2,000 people populated the colony. The year Queensland became a separate colony in 1859 is the same year the first Masonic Lodge was established, making the craft as old as the state itself. From the mid-1860s, the many Scottish workers that were brought to build the railways helped strengthen Freemasonry in the colony. In those days, the communication between the United Kingdom and its overseas colonies was, understandably, much slower than today, often with correspondence taking many months to be received and answered. After many years, Freemasons in Australia began to organise and petition their overseas Grand Lodges for the independence to manage their own affairs. By 1883, the number of Masonic lodges in South Australia had grown to 33, and they came together to establish the Grand Lodge of South Australia on April the 16th, 1884. As Australia grew and developed, the first Northern Territory Lodge formed in Port Darwin in 1896 under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of South Australia. On August the 16th, 1888, the 183 Masonic lodges across New South Wales came together to form the Grand Lodge of New South Wales. The Grand Lodge of Western Australia was established on February the 27th, 1900, with an impressive installation held at Government House. Masonic development followed the construction of roads and railways in Queensland, leading to 280 new lodges by 1921. The same year saw the establishment of a United Grand Lodge of Queensland on April the 21st. Freemasonry in Australia from this point on grew and flourished with the growth and development of the colonies. Many influential men and founders of Australia, such as Sir Edmund Barton, Australia's first Prime Minister, Lord Thomas Bracey, Governor of Victoria, and Fred Walker, creator of our beloved Vegemite, were proud to call themselves Freemasons. On December 23rd, 1839 in Melbourne, 21 Freemasons drew up a petition to form a Masonic Lodge. This lodge was to be called Lodge of Australia Felix and to be held under the authority of the Grand Lodge of England. The Lodge of Australia Felix grew rapidly, with 50 candidates and 30 joining members in the first 12 months of its establishment. This quick expansion showed the enthusiasm for Freemasonry in the colonies, and in quick succession led to the formation of lodges under the Scottish and Irish constitutions. By the end of the 1840s, Melbourne's population reached more than 23,000, and as the population of Melbourne and its surrounds grew, the growth of Freemasonry was evident. Other villages in the Port Phillip district became developed enough to warrant the introduction of Freemasonry. The Geelong Lodge of Unity and Prudence formed in 1847, and the Portland Lodge of Victoria in 1849, curiously anticipating the name that would be given to the new colony a few years later. By the beginning of the 1850s, Melbourne had grown into a large and important town. Schools and churches had been established, roads had been laid, and some premises even had gas lighting. In 1851, two major events occurred. The colony of Victoria came into existence by separating from New South Wales, and gold was discovered within the territory, leading to the dramatic population increase in the ensuing decade. By the end of the 1850s, Melbourne had begun to spawn suburbs, and gold fever led to the birth of many country towns, with people coming to Victoria seeking their fortunes. By no means did all the lodges formed during these boom times survive, but Masonry flourished at this time.
In 1867, a building was purchased in Lonsdale Street specifically dedicated to Freemasonry. The Lonsdale Street Hall had never been very successful, and so a building located at 25 Collins Street was purchased. The foundation stone was laid on the 26th of March 1885, and it now stands outside the East Melbourne Masonic Centre.
A group of Freemasons from all three constitutions came together to establish the Freemasons' homes to assist aged members of the fraternity. Although from humble beginnings, the homes have expanded across Victoria and are an integral part of Victoria's aged care facilities today. As Melbourne grew and expanded, there was a need for an improved bridge to cross the Yarra. The Prince's Bridge was designed and the foundation stone laid by Mrs. Amelia Henderson Stewart, wife of Freemason and Mayor of Melbourne at the time, James Copper Stewart. As any important piece of history should be, the trowel from this ceremony can be found preserved and displayed in the library at the Masonic Centre of Victoria. At this stage, Freemasons in Victoria desired to control their own affairs and to seek independence from the Grand Lodges of England, Scotland and Ireland. Accordingly, an attempt was made to form a Grand Lodge of Victoria in the colony. In 1883, the Grand Lodge of Victoria was established, with George Seth Coppin, actor, politician and owner of the Princess Theatre on Spring Street, elected as Grand Master. However, at this time many lodges still retained their loyalty to their respective overseas Grand Lodges, and the Grand Lodge of Victoria was short-lived. By 1889, almost all lodges in Victoria agreed to form a united Grand Lodge of Victoria, incorporating every lodge meeting in Victoria with one exception. On the 20th of March 1889, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria was formed, and Sir William John Clark was installed as its first Grand Master.
Sir William John Clark was responsible for the Ashes as we know it. In 1884, after visiting England and watching the Australians beat England for the first time, Sir William invited the entire English cricket team to his residence in Sunbury, Victoria, where he proceeded to burn the bales from the stumps and place them in a special ceramic urn he had made especially as a gift. And so the Ashes were born by a proud resident of Victoria and a truly respected and admired Freemason.
Over the coming years, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria established boards and committees controlling matters of general purpose, benevolence and buildings. They focused on establishing uniformity in rituals across the state.
The ritual in Freemasonry reveals stories of intellectual and moral truth. The ritual that we use in Victoria is based on the English ceremonies from the early 19th century. The Victorian ritual has remained largely unchanged for the past 125 years.
After World War I, Freemasonry in Victoria experienced its largest percentage growth in history, from 18,000 members to more than 44,000. Plans for the development of a Freemasons hospital began in 1933, with Grand Lodge negotiating the purchase of a site for the proposed hospital in East Melbourne. Construction began in 1936. The hospital was a practical example of the expression of work of Freemasons within the community. With the outbreak of war in 1939, a new committee was formed and funds were used for the relief of soldiers, sailors and Air Force brethren in need. During this same time, a Grand Master's Appeal Fund was established. As a united demonstration of loyalty and a service of thanksgiving for the fighting forces, presentation of gifts were made to the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Military Forces, the Royal Australian Air Force. Additional donations were also made to the Merchant Navy, Red Cross and the Australian Comforts Fund. With the growing membership of Freemasons in Victoria reaching close to 100,000, the need for a larger Masonic home became evident, and in 1955, Grand Lodge purchased a Presbyterian Ladies' College in East Melbourne for redevelopment. Planning and accumulation of funds was slow, with demolition of the site commencing in September 1966. The Masonic Centre of Victoria was officially opened on March the 17th, 1969, and was named after Sir Dallas Brooks. Sir Dallas Brooks was a British military commander who went on to become Victoria's 19th and longest serving governor. Brooks was also the United Grand Lodge of Victoria's longest running Grand Master, from 1951 until 1963. The birth of the Freemasons Task Force was seen in 1978. The task force was described as the culmination of the desire of many members of the craft already active in community service and charitable endeavours to participate in these activities as Freemasons rather than members of other organisations. In 1986, John William Connell was elected as Grand Master. Preparations were well underway for the United Grand Lodge of Victoria to celebrate its centenary. During John Connell's time as Grand Master, the Freemasons Hospital Breast Clinic opened. This latest initiative was from the desire to identify new needs for healthcare in the community. This had commenced with the opening of the Injuries and Arthritis Unit some 5 years earlier, and continued with the development of additional hospital facilities on the land between Victoria Parade and the Masonic Centre of Victoria in 1987. While the various hospital units served the Freemasons and community well for many years, all facilities were eventually sold to Epworth Hospital in 2006. With Freemasonry in Victoria dating almost as far back as the settlement of these lands some 185 years ago, it's evident that Freemasonry, as well as its members, has played an integral role in the history, development and growth of Victoria. Today, Freemasonry is as relevant as it ever was, and will see the installation of Right Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict as its 44th Grand Master on March 20th, 2014. Thanks for joining us. To find out more about Freemasonry, visit the Freemasons Victoria website at www.freemasonsvic.net.au or phone us on 1800 Freemason. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, LinkedIn and Google+. See you next week.